Imagine a future where people gave up control. A single piece of technology now decides how you experience the world. You don't decide where to walk, where to drive, where to eat, what you see. This is not a dystopian 1980s cyberpunk anime. This is the real world. Everyone is talking about how TikTok and Instagram are fueling mass addiction, how Apple is limiting how you can use the phone you own, how OpenAI is ruthlessly ingesting the internet to train the next GPT model. But there's a piece of technology that's much more important, much more dangerous, and no one ever talks about it. We blindly trust Google Maps with the most important thing we have, our own lives. Where we physically are in the world, what we see, where we drive. We are more than happy to give it full access to our every move. So why does nobody care? Well, as it turns out, there's a very specific reason why. And it all starts with a question. How did Google Maps solve the 1% dilemma? No, the 1% dilemma is not the title of some corny self-development book. When you build a product, any product, whether it's an AI chatbot or a toaster, it's relatively easy to build something that solves the problem for the first 80% of use cases. If you're building a mapping app, this means having good maps of cities, having navigation that works, navigating around highways of your average developed country. So you start by solving the problem for 80, 90, 99% of cases, and it's relatively easy to get there. But then you get to the last 1%. And the last 1%, it's a bitch. Because building a product that solves for this last 1% takes an enormous and exponential amount of resources. These are the weird edge cases, the people that use your product in extreme ways or in weird ways. For Google Maps, this might be trying to cross the Australian desert on roads that were barely mapped 10 years ago. If you are building Microsoft Excel, you're probably building your product for Finance Bros Invests. But in Japan, there's this guy that uses Excel to make paintings. And this is especially true for mapping apps. Why? Well, Google Maps is something you use with high frequency, maybe multiple times a day. And every time you use it, you add another chance of being in that 1% scenario that the app just gets wrong. Maybe the opening times of the stores are wrong. Maybe the bus actually doesn't run on Sundays. Maybe you are in the middle of nowhere and the road ends in a cliff. The more frequent the use, the more you're likely to trigger a 1% problem. And usually in the digital world, if an app fails, it's not a big deal. If you can't find something obscure on Google search, you'll find another way. That's fine. But for mapping applications, failing means leading you in the middle of nowhere to a dangerous road, drive you to a gas station that doesn't exist anymore, and you end up with no gas, make you go to the other side of the city to go to a store that's actually closed today. And yeah, these all happened to me. And it doesn't need to be dangerous. A few weeks ago, I agreed to meet a friend outside a bar here in London, and it took 20 minutes to find each other. Turns out, he used Apple Maps on his iPhone and it showed the entrance to be on the wrong side of the block. He immediately removed Apple Maps and started using Google Maps from there on. Imagine a product that solves a world-changing problem in 99.9999 of cases. This would be great, except if that product is self-driving cars. That 0.00001% means that you'll get in a little accident sooner or later. And these are the stories that you hear about in the news.
So how does Google Maps solve the unsolvable last 1%? How does Google Maps actually work?
For that, we have to start here. Cartographers have been mapping the world on ships and horses for hundreds of years, with varying degrees of success. It would be easier to do this if you could, just be higher. Yes, let's use planes. Now we're talking. Can we go higher? Yes, here's satellites. And here's this cool new thing called the web. Can we show maps on the web? Yes, enter MapQuest. And now it gives you navigation, but you can basically only navigate from point A to point B. There's no satellite image, you cannot move around the map, you cannot explore anything. And now enter Google. They are at the peak of their golden age. They are building a world-changing, revolutionary product every year or two. And they're like, this mapping stuff is interesting. MapQuest kinda sucks, and we're good with computers, so what can we do here? Let's start by acquiring this startup called Where2. They built a way to navigate around the map on the web without loading times. You can just explore with your mouse and move around. This is so cool. And now enter the startup Keyhole. They built this cool technology to take satellite images and zoom in seamlessly at different levels of detail. There's this cool story of the Google founders finding out about this tech during a completely unrelated meeting, stopping everything, hijacking the projector, and starting to look up their house from satellite images. And a few minutes later, everyone in the room was dying to look up at their house as well. This is when they realized how huge this could become. And so they acquired Keyhole, and all the puzzle pieces are starting to fall into place. They launched Google Maps, but they are just getting started. In 2007, they have a crazy idea. Hey, what if we, took pictures of every street in the world? It sounds like a reasonable idea to them, and so Street View was born. They go to transport authorities and start to integrate public transport. For a few years, they even owned their own satellites. And this is where the most fascinating piece starts. Project Ground Truth. Because they have all these different data points, but then they merge it all up into one gigantic model of the world that's as up to date as humanly possible. Every building, every street, every road, everything feeds into this. From using satellite images and image recognition to identify roads and buildings, to detecting street sign and business name from Street View. This is the tool that Google used over 10 years ago to manually adjust its dataset of roads based on satellite images. But today, most of this is automated. And then they realized, hey, why do we need to send thousands of cars around the world when we already have our users everywhere? So they started to push the gas on crowdsourcing, from business reviews to confirming opening hours of a shop to signaling road closures. This all feeds into the giant model of ground truth. And today, Google captures 50 million new updates to its map every single day. This is how they're solving for that last 1%. But this also creates a problem. We now have mountains of data on this map. So how do we make this look not like this? How do we make it simple? Well, as it turns out, simple and easy are two very different things. First, we need some design rules for text. Any text on the map cannot overlap without a text. Then we need to define different levels of hierarchy, from cities to neighborhoods and road names and names of attractions and businesses, and they need to have an exclusivity radius around them. For example, when zoomed out, each level of importance, like a big city or town, has a radius where no other of the same level can be around them. Another thing that comes from the very early days of Google Maps is this thing. See, competitors like Yahoo were using red stars to mark points on the map, but the Google team invented this guy, the pin, which doesn't cover what's around the target. And now it's so iconic, it's literally the app's logo. But good design is not just the interface. It's understanding and studying how users actually use your product in real life. For example, have you ever tried using maps while you're on a bike? Whenever you have to zoom, you end up doing this weird contortionism to try to zoom in with one hand. Well, this is why you can double tap and move your finger up and down to zoom in or out. I know, your mind is blown right now. And yes, by the way, you can do this in other apps as well, like Photos. And by looking at how people actually use your product, you'll often learn that they do things that you haven't planned for. Many people preview the route to their destination to see where to go, but then they would not hit start and they would stay on this view. Why? Because it gives them more context on where they are and what's around them compared to this other view. So they can better explore the area or take an alternative, more interesting route. So with a recent update, now Maps is updating your ETA and the path you're taking, even if you don't start the navigation. Now, all of this that we talked about doesn't come cheap, but Google Maps brought in an estimated $11 billion in 2023. This is around the same amount of revenue that TikTok brought in. But at this point, something just doesn't add up. In the last years, we've seen a lot of backlash on companies collecting data to make massive profits. Social media companies are at the top of the list. And my most watched video on this channel is about how Google Search has been really pushing the gas on monetization, and many people are realizing it's not as good as it once was. And Maps is potentially one of the most dangerous and sensitive tech products ever. It literally decides where millions of people move every single day. It could make a certain town thrive and another one go desert. It could completely change in-person commerce more than anything else. Think about what a supervillain could do if he gets control of Google Maps. This is the scale of the problem. Google Maps and other applications collect your live location, which businesses you visit, which routes you take, and they do make money off of this. But no one seems to care. Many people today are obsessed about which data they share online and which social media company is using that data to sell them ads, but they're happy to use Maps and leave on location history, which gives you a full history of all the places you've been to. But as it turns out, there's a reason why. It's because of this, the data value balance. So in the traditional world, the better a product is, the more value it provides and the more it costs. Now, I know, for all the aspiring economists in the audience, bear with me for a second. Most global web products today are free, so the real cost you pay comes from your attention and your data, which can be used, for example, for advertising. I hope this is not news to you. But this only works if there's a balance. The more data or attention I give you, the more you're gonna reward me back with a product that's useful or entertaining or that makes my life better. Now, at the start, basically all tech products start here. They do something very cool and they don't ask for much in return. Very nice. But over time, we all know what happens. Social media companies start to mine even more data and prioritize addiction and maximizing the time you spend on the app so they can increase the revenues. And in turn, they're not giving you a better product. They're actually making you hate yourself for spending 2 hours on a bombastic feed of fast content. Even Google search has started to go down this path of monetizing the search results more and more. And this is where the balance breaks. And this is where you start to see people talking about it. For companies, it's tempting to go up because it means more money. But if you don't bring an equivalent amount of value, the machine just breaks. The exchange is not fair anymore. And so the reason why Google Maps still works today is that it's still here. Does it track me? Yes, but what I get in return is still much more valuable. I do have locations history on. On Mac, there's this app called Rewind. And it records everything you do on the screen and everything you say on the microphone constantly, 24/7. And it allows you to go back and ask questions about what you did. Useful? Yes, of course. But the price here in terms of privacy and data is incredibly high. So for my taste, the trade-off doesn't work, for example. Now, some people will disagree with me here, but I don't believe that sharing zero data and having zero tracking is something we should strive for. Unless you are a secret agent from the CIA, I guess. Because data can be used to build an objectively better and more personalized experience that makes your life better. It leads to a better product, but this only works if the data that's collected provides value in return. Now, I know we have left out something big here. What about Apple Maps? Apple Maps came out in 2012, and at first it was a complete disaster, literally sending people on bridges that didn't exist. But over time, it caught on. It's hard to make a clear estimate since the data is not public, but Google Maps has from 2 times to 9 times more users than Apple Maps worldwide. Many iPhone users might start with a default on their iPhone, but then they hit a 1% problem, or 2, or 3, and that's when they switch back to Google Maps. Now, this might not last forever, of course. Google today still has an advantage in terms of data, especially the amount of crowdsourced data it captures. But there's also been many interesting projects developing like OpenStreetMap, an open alternative to Google and Apple Maps. Or they could also end up taking the path of aggressive monetization and reducing the value of the product, going dangerously close to this area right here. Google, please don't do this. This is your best product right now. Don't ruin it. To me, Google Maps is the embodiment of the perfect tech product. It's using the latest technology not for the sake of saying AI in your marketing, but to solve truly complex problems, like building a living and real-time map of the world, or reducing 250,000 cars worth of pollution with its fuel efficiency algorithm for navigation. And considering how it literally controls where the world moves, they've done a pretty good job of not getting it into the hands of a supervillain. Yet, at least. So, remember all the genius design tricks behind maps? Well, this is just the tip of the iceberg. The tech you use every day, from your phone to your computer, is built on, well, lies. And you can learn all about it in this other video right here. I'm Enrico, and on this channel I go behind the scenes of the design, psychology and future of the tech you use every day. And see you in the next one.